Hey everyone, welcome back. So in the last video we have learned about the ephemeral container. Now in this video we are going to learn about the static pod. So in this video we will cover what is static pod, why does Kubernetes need a static pod, how does it different from the normal pod, and we will also see the hands-on on the static pod. So let's get started. So we know that in Kubernetes the control plane manages everything. The EPS server receives the request and scheduler assign the pod to the node, and Kubelet create and run the pod. But now think about this. What if the control plane itself not running yet? Maybe the cluster is just getting started, or maybe the API server has crashed. So in that situations, you can't use the kubectl apply because API server is not running, and you can't use the scheduler because it has not started yet. So how does the Kubernetes start itself? So this is exactly a static pod coming. So what is static pod? Now the static pod is the pod which is managed directly by the kubelet on the node without any involvement from the API server or control plane. So in the normal pod, you run kubectl apply, API server receive the request, and scheduler assigned to the node, and kubelet create the pod. But in the static pod, you place the YAML file directly in the special folder on the node, and the kubelet watches that folder, see the file, and automatically create the node. No API server, no scheduler, and no kubectl apply is needed. Now if you go to the Kubernetes master node and look inside etc Kubernetes manifest, you will find the YAML file for API server, control manager, scheduler, and etc. These all files are the static pod. The kubelet uses these files to start the control plane when the cluster is starting up. Now let me give a simple example to understand this. Think of the security guard at the buildings. Normally the guard receives the instruction from the control plane, but what if the control plane goes down? The guard keep instruction with him, so even the control plane is unavailable, he know exactly what to do. So in Kubernetes, control room is equal to API server and control plane. Security guard is equal to kubelet, and the local instruction is equal to static pod YAML file in the etc Kubernetes manifest folder. So let's quickly compare between the static pod and normal pod. So the normal pod are managed by the API server and scheduler, while the static pod directly managed by the kubelet. Normal pod are created using kubectl apply, whereas the static pod created by placing a YAML file on the node. Normal pod require Kubernetes control plane, but the static pod run without it. Normal pod can be deleted with kubectl delete, while the static pod are removed by deleting their manifest file from the node. One important thing, the static pod do appear in the kubelet get pod, but they are read only, and to delete the static pod, you must delete the YAML file from the node. So let's do the hands-on on the static. Open the killercoder.com, select the Kubernetes playground, and wait for the environment to load. Once it is loaded, we will verify the cluster. So let's verify the cluster now, and to verify it, we will run kubectl get nodes. And you will see the nodes are in ready state. So let's get started. Now before creating the static pod, let's check the static pod that Kubernetes already have. So to check this, we will run ls command and followed by the manifest folder. And you will see kube-apiserver, control manager, scheduler, and etc folder. And these are the files that Kubelet uses to run the control plane. Now let's check the static pod in the kube-system namespace. And you will also see the pod name like etc API server control manager and kube scheduler. Also notice the node name is appended to the pod name, and this is signature of the static pod. So let's navigate to the manifest folder and create the YAML file to define the static pod. Let's create the YAML file now. And press I and copy the following. And press escape and then colon WQ to save and exit the file. Now let's verify the pod. So we did not run any kubectl apply command, we just placed the file inside the manifest folder, and the kubelet detected the new file and automatically created the pod. And notice the name in the YAML file, the pod name is static pod. But when we create the pod name is static web control plane. And this is how you can identify the static pod. So let's try to delete the pod using kubectl. And let's check the status again. Now you see the pod is back. So basically kubelet is watching the file. As long as the file exit, the pod keeps running and the kubelet delete does not work on the static pod. So to actually delete the pod, let's delete the YAML file. And let's check the status again. So the pod has been deleted, no resources found in the default namespace. So let's quickly recap. A static pod is directly managed by the kubelet. No API server or no scheduler is required. Placing the YAML file in the etc Kubernetes manifest, the kubelet automatically create the pod. Kubernetes uses the static pod to run the control plane such as API server, etcd, scheduler and control manager. Static pod appear in the kubelet get delete, but read only. You cannot delete them with static pod delete. To delete the static pod, you need to delete the file from the manifest folder. You can identify the static pod by its name. The node name is always appended. So the key commands are ls etc kubernetes manifest file to view the static files on the node, kubelet get node -n kube-system view the control plane static pod. So that's everything about the static pod. In the next video, we will learn about the pod lifecycle and phases. Thank you for watching and I will see you next video.